It's really hard to get that balance right in a personal film, I think. You can't make a film like this in a vacuum. Over and over again, I would get the feedback like, well, what does Rachel think about this? And how does Rachel feel about this? And I would just get so irritated with that note because it just kept coming no matter how much I tried to tell my own story. I think it was doing some labs, like I did the Sundance Edit and Story Lab. They knew that I needed to go into that space where I could access my own feelings and then somehow articulate them in a film. I wanted it to be like you seeing your own parents or your own relationships with your children or your parents or photography. So that's my hope.
You both should tell people what it takes to get a movie like this made, because I know you worked on this for an extremely long time, and it is, I think some people look at personal films like this as if they're, not so much work and effort, but it's maybe even more than bigger kinds of films. So tell us a little bit about how long you've been working on it and how it took shape.
Sure. So I started it in 2011. Well, that's when I had the idea. And then I wasn't a filmmaker at that time, so I had to learn how to make a film while also going through the actual life experience of getting to know my mother through all these materials. And as far as like what it took, it would really be hard to quantify that because it was not only a decade of my life, but it was lots of emotional labor, tons of producing labor, just fundraising, lots of money, and just everything you learn along the way, trials and tribulations of making a film. But I think it took the time it needed to take ultimately. And Christopher, who's the editor and co-writer and editor, he came on board just in the last, I think, year and a half of the process. And we collaborated very closely to bring it to the finish line. Do you want to say anything?
Share a little bit?
To make a film like this, you have to go into the world of pain, and it takes over your life. But, hopefully there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and we found it, thank God.
Yeah.
Yeah, how did you, I guess there's so many threads to it, and I wonder how you arrived at the kind of, I guess, sort of like thing that you wove in the end with them. I'm curious about when you first started, if you thought it was going to be more about photography and photographers and going through her archive, and at what point it became about you, or if that was always the idea.
I think when I started it, I knew it was my own desire to know my mother that was at the center of the story. But I had been a photographer for many years, and I was used to being behind the camera. So I hadn't really anticipated what it would take on every level to be in the film and tell my own story. So I hadn't really thought that through. If I knew what I know now, I might not have gone down that road. But it always was going to be like from my perspective. But I don't think I knew like what would be entailed to really dig into that emotional space.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what it took that you didn't anticipate?
I think I did a lot of test screenings and throughout the last maybe 5 years of making the film. And over again, I would get the feedback like, well, what does Rachel think about this? And how does Rachel feel about this? And if we don't know that, then we're not going to care about Sheila or her story. And I would just get so irritated with that note because it just kept coming no matter how much I tried to tell my own story. And I think films like this can go too far in the other direction and, be too self-conscious, or it's really hard to get that balance right in a personal film, I think, where, it's not too much and it's not too little. So I think it was doing some labs, like I did the Sundance Edit and Story Lab in 2019. And really, they brought me there because they knew that I needed to go into that space where I could access my own feelings and then somehow articulate them in a film, write the narration and all of that. And so that was really helpful. So I feel like you can't make a film like this in a vacuum because I think you need to see what you don't know. You don't know what's interesting necessarily about your own story to an audience. And I was concerned with audience's experience because I didn't want it to be just just walk away and think, oh, that's just Rachel's family. We don't care. I wanted it to be like you seeing your own parents or your own relationships with your children or your parents or photography. So that's my hope, is that that comes across.
Mm-hmm. And Chris, can you tell us a little bit about like when you came on and what you saw in the story and how you thought about helping to shape it?
Well, I came to the story because Rachel and I actually were romantically involved. She was my girlfriend. And yeah, and she would not let me see the film for like 8 or 9 months.
I don't think it was that long.
For like maybe 6 months. But like at first it was, it was a new relationship and she was getting out of a relationship and it was really sensitive to her and was like a really vulnerable thing that maybe they hadn't quite figured out yet. And it had been submitted to some film festivals and hadn't quite gotten where it needed to. And I think the process was sort of like figuring out, going back to like, what did Rachel want to do with this film? Like, how can we tell Rachel's perspective the best way possible? And that was like getting back to like this conversation between her and her mother. Her original vision for this film was, I want to be able to talk to my mom. And so we had to figure out a way to create a film where at the end of the film, she sits in a chair next to her mother and it feels real. And it feels like that moment, it transforms into our real lives. And so it's like you boil a frog in water. You put a frog in cold water and start to boil it and they don't know that they're being boiled. And the water gets warmer and warmer. And that's what we had to do to the audience. And so we just had to figure out how to boil the water and how to thread Sheila's story and Rachel's story and the themes that these photographers talk about and explore in their work, and how those themes thread with Rachel and her mother's lives.
Yeah, since you brought it up, I did want to talk about the last section because I'm, you know this, but I'm also a member of the Dead Moms Club, as people like to say. And I mean, I cannot watch the last part without just like weeping, because it's so beautiful to see this like cinematic sort of fantasy, like but real of you getting to join her and like spend time with her. And it feels so beautiful, and like it really does feel satisfying in a way. And also, I don't know if anybody's ever said this, but it reminds me of the two Fridas, that painting where they're like sitting. It really looks like that, and I always think about that when I watch it.
That's cool. You just need to see our organs and then
Yeah. But we just did.
Vessel.
We just like
Yeah.
you laid everything out. But yeah, I wonder about how you put together the audio as if she's sort of interviewing you, and how you figured out what were the important things for her to ask, and you to say.
Yeah, so at some point, maybe a few years back, I had the idea. So I've got like, say, 100 hours of her interviewing other people as a journalist, not only the photographers, but many other people. And so I thought, why don't we isolate just her questions in a spreadsheet and in like a timeline, and then I'll see what questions she already asked, and I'll see which ones resonate with me. So that was one process. I had like hundreds and hundreds of her questions just isolated in a spreadsheet. And then as we were making the film, it became apparent like this film could be a bazillion different things, and we had so much material. So it became apparent that there's only certain themes that belonged in the film. And once we realized that, then I knew there were only certain conversations that would make sense within that. For example, like, do I want to have children or not? Or like the themes that come up in the film. So once I was able to narrow that down, then we were able to sort of see like which questions and, make sense. So it was a little bit less overwhelming to look at. But some of it was like, I was inspired by some of her questions just as they were. It wasn't so much me necessarily knowing what I wanted her to ask me right away. And then I just kind of played off of that and answered them.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit also about constructing the visuals of the seating together? I don't know if you're willing to share the secrets, but
Sure. I think, are we all filmmakers here? We're all in the industry one way or another. Yeah, I mean, it was a green screen that we used, and I think it was like, because there's all these different kinds of archival materials, I feel like I'm testing like each one, like how close can I get to my mother through her journals, through her audio, through her photographs. And then when I saw the image of her sitting there, and I just had the idea one day that, and I could also be in the room with her, that would be like maybe the last thing to try. And so we just, I had like my PA sitting across from me like you are, and I was staring at him for a good 10 minutes or whatever it was, awkwardly. And then when the editor put it together on the screen, I think I was so overcome. I was almost shocked because it felt really real. It felt so real to me. And then that was the moment when I just was like, oh, this is why I make movies. Like, this is so powerful. Like, I could feel like I actually am in the room with my mother just by making a movie about it and being in the room with her in the movie. And that's why I go see movies, so I could feel things that are maybe not real, but, I can imagine. So that's how it all came together.
What were, I guess, maybe some of the biggest surprises from, digging into learning about her, or learning about yourself, or learning about, becoming a filmmaker along the way?
Um, yeah, I'll answer, and then maybe Christopher has some surprises that he found. I think, for the first like 8 years, I was interviewing all these other people about who she was, and I didn't find her journals until that long into the process of making the film. And so, people said lots of great things about her, and like that's not really super interesting in a movie. Like when everyone's just like, "Oh, this person's awesome and amazing," but when I read her journals, there was like this dark side of how she saw herself because of the societal, just like what she was up against as a woman born in 1937 who had really big ambitions and didn't want to get married when she was 20 and have kids right away. And so just like learning her struggles and the dark times she went through, just like being who she was. But the Gordon Parks nude photo book was definitely one of the little gems, little Easter eggs that came across. And that I figured out because in her journals, she mentions posing for Gordon Parks. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And then the next line is, I told Gabriel about it, and I probably shouldn't have. And so I deduced that, well, probably she might have been naked or something happened because obviously he wouldn't care otherwise. So then it was like this goose hunt to try to find this book, which we eventually found.
So fun.
But her name's not in the book, and you wouldn't. I had to just look at it and think that looks like her somehow. So
she's so cool. That's amazing. I love Gordon Parks' photography, so it's just like
I know that's like, and I have to. He must have like burned all their letters, or I don't know. They did have some sort of relationship, but he must have burned it because like they're nowhere to be found in his archives, and couldn't find it in hers either. So I don't know what actually happened, but.
Oh, the mystery's fun. Yeah, Christopher, I'm curious too about, I can't imagine how much time, you were spending getting to know Sheila as well along the way, and, maybe surprises or like what you learned from her.
Yeah, it was really a cool experience to get to know her mom so intimately through the material. Like you meet, I would have never gotten to meet her, get to know her as intimately if not sort of presented with all of her materials. So I was just, I felt lucky to be able to get to know her in that way. And there were just, anecdotes from her life that, we still talk about. She's a really beautiful soul,
Mm-hmm. You should mention about how you brought some of Joseph's story.
Well, yeah. I guess from a filmmaking perspective, it was fun to try to use the footage in a way that maybe Rachel hadn't intended it to. Like the rehearsal season 1 was out at the time, and I was really inspired by just sort of challenging what reality was. And so we started using the footage that maybe they hadn't intended to be used in the film, the BTS footage. And it was like in those scraps on the fringes where we started to feel like stories started to emerge. And it was like in that tension where we saw this relationship with Joseph starting to kind of crack around the edges. And that was sort of the key to unlocking the film, was figuring out how to use the footage in a way that maybe it had never been intended to be used.
awesome. Yeah. Was that, what did it, I mean, since you brought it up and asked and mentioned it, how did you take it? What did it mean to you when you started listening to it that way?
Well, I think there were like many like meta layers to that experience working with Christopher on it, because like our relationship was still fairly new at the time, and he was encouraging me to bring my ex-husband's story into the film. And so that was interesting, because I was always questioning like, is he comfortable with this, like, or because he was helping write that part too. And there was one day where I was like, we weren't working in the same room, and um, I came into the room and he had like written some like temp VO narration in my voice talking about Joseph, and he like recorded his own voice, and it was just like super weird. But it's like things like that would happen where I was just like, this is like bizarre, and then we would joke about like, well, maybe there's a layer where like we see Christopher editing footage about Joseph, and yeah. But I had to draw the line somewhere, because like there were several people in my life who have made it into the film, and I was like, okay, this is it. Although his voice, he does laugh, and he has like a laugh cameo.
And like the point you made at the beginning, I just want to get back to is just sort of like personal film. Like it really just takes over your life, and you have to figure out how to capture your real life in a film and create a character. You know what I mean? Like Rachel, the character, is not Rachel, the person, but you have to do all of this inner emotional work to figure out like, okay, this is what I'm committing to forever, and this is what I'm standing behind forever. And so that was really difficult, for her. And we couldn't work if we were fighting about something. And so there was just so much like relationship work that we had to do just sometimes to even do a day of work. It really just, it takes over your life. It's like bringing a child into the world, and we don't have children, but we made this film, so I'm really proud of the effort that she's put into it, and just bringing it into the world it's been a journey. It really has.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said about it, like having to commit to something because it's going to be in the film, and it's like it's almost the opposite or like the inverse of the time anxiety thing. It's like you're trying to defy mortality by putting something down, but then by putting something down, you're I don't know, giving up the fleetingness of life or something in a way. And I wondered too about the thing with, the whole watching someone who parented you, like, or knowing that they passed away early and it creating this anxiety. It seems like she kind of had that too. And I wonder, you touch on this in the film a little bit at one point, but do you think that she was aware that she might be, dying early and was thinking about that? Because she's so obsessed with photography.
Yeah.
And the way she talks about it.
Right.
It feels like it.
It's interesting. The only person that I talked to, and I talked to a lot of people about her, who said that she talked about that was with Dick Robinson, which was interesting. Like, why was it with him? But she confided in him. She said, like, I could be walking down the street and die right on the spot. So she saw many women on her mother's side die young, like before the age of 50. Probably 6 or 7 of my grandmother's sisters all died young. My grandmother had a stroke when she was 37, but she survived. So she no doubt had that in the back of her mind. It's hard to say. She never told my dad about it. That was one of the cut scenes, was him getting really angry about that. But it just was like sort of an outlier.
About Dick Robinson, or about you asking whether or not?
my dad was angry that that she told Dick Robinson but never told him, not because it was Dick Robinson, but just why didn't she tell the father of her children that that this could happen, I do think there was something to that, and I think as her daughter, I also have this sort of feeling of like this day could be it, which, like, I don't know, probably not everybody has that, but people who lose a parent young or see somebody close to them die young may have that more than others.
Yeah, I mean, I know I do. Yeah. I also wanted to ask about when and how Kirsten Johnson got involved, because I'm such a fan of hers, and
Yeah.
what she kind of brought to the project. I'm curious about.
Yeah, she is incredible. I went to her workshop at the Bronx Documentary Center like in 2015 or 16 or something. And it just blew my mind. And I had been, one of my producers had worked with her on Camera Person, Danielle Varga is a producer. And so I just slowly started kind of like, emailing Kirsten Johnson and saying, hey, could you look at a cut? Always a little slightly sheepishly. But over the years, like 5 or 6 years, she watched at least 3 or 4 or 5 or more cuts and we'd have Zooms and stuff. And so in the last couple years, I just was like, all right, I'm going to bite the bullet and ask her if she wants to be an EP. And she's like, oh my God, I'd be so honored. I'd love to be an EP. So it just kind of happened. Like it was like slowly building the relationship. And then, yeah. And she just had we had amazing conversations because our work is very aligned
Yeah,
in many ways.
absolutely.
Yeah.
How do you have the patience when you have the time anxiety to give the work to hold back from just being like, I just need to be done with this and just wrap it up?
Oh gosh. Honestly, I mean, I had this feeling it felt impossible to finish this film, but I also had the feeling that if I didn't, I couldn't really do anything else significant with my life. It was just like, so it was like I had to do it, And the last year with us editing day in, day out was frankly kind of brutal. He has something to say about that.
Well, just we got into a film festival, and that forced us to finish it. It was
Yeah, thank God.
we got into True False, which is a great film festival, and that forced us to finish it. But it wasn't really done, of course, and we did a bunch more versions. But then finally the money ran out, and we just had to finish it.
Yeah, having deadlines is incredibly important. But yeah, it was extremely hard. I felt like I couldn't travel. I couldn't like do any other creative projects. I couldn't do anything major in my personal life until this was like done. So it was just this internal pressure that I put on myself. And I had, like, no joke, a couple of nervous breakdowns in that year. Definitely.
Yeah, understandable. What did your dad think of the film?
Yeah, I mean, he's always been like an incredible supporter of the project. My mother was the love of his life, and he always wanted her memory to be kept alive. So, he watched it. I showed it to him last year. He has significant dementia now. So I don't know if he remembered after he watched it, but he watched it with great intent, and it's his life that he's watching too. So, obviously, I can't even imagine how he's processing that watching it. But I think it makes him a little sad, and I think it also makes him proud, and I think he's just so happy that she's being honored.
Yeah, I'm so happy he's in the film. He's really so charming and lovely to watch. So
He could have his own film. One of the problems with earlier cuts was that there was a lot more of him, but he would steal the show because he's so funny and charming, and would just be like, well, he's great. We're a whole movie about him, And it's like, okay, well, maybe we actually need less of him so that people aren't like wanting more of him. But he is hilarious,
yeah,
actually.
I mean, I'd watch it in a heartbeat. We need to wrap up, but I was wondering also if you could just tell us a little bit about, what's the archive and where it is and what's happening with it. And, I mean, I would definitely read a book of all of her interviews or listen to all of them or something. And I would love to see and hear more of it.
Yeah, I mean, those are some pet projects on my to-do list that I haven't gotten to yet. One of which is a podcast. There's, like I said, dozens of hours of these interviews with photographers. They live in the archives at the International Center of Photography in analog form. I probably have the only digital copy of them in the world. But I would like to collaborate with them and do a podcast with those. And then the old Images of Man programs, they're still in analog form. You can get them on eBay for like at least $500 each now. Oftentimes in like a big audience in random places in the country, like somebody will raise their hand and be like, I'm still showing this to my photography students. Like they still will bring out like the old like 1970s projector just so they could show the Cartier-Bresson program or whatever. So they still have legs today, I guess. And I would love to do something with her photographs, maybe a book or something, or an exhibit.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, I'm sure Chris and Rachel would be happy to talk to you in the area outside, but how about one more round of applause for our amazing filmmakers? Thank you all
Thank
so
you.
much for
Could I
coming.
just say one thing?
Yeah, please.
So we're actually about to open in LA at the Lumley Theaters next week on the 12th, and we're doing some special Q&As with a variety film critic and video consortium documentary group. So if you know anyone who might like the film, please send them out. We would love to have more people come out. So thank you. And I'm on Instagram, Rachel Elizabeth Seed, if you want to talk about anything in the film later. Christopher Stoudt.